And to help us unpack the financial impact of the shutdown, we now speak to Isaah Mhlanga, the Executive Chief Economist at Alexander Forbes. Mr. Mhlanga, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to Prime News on 3.
Thanks for having me.
Well, in as much as the streets were painted red, but it suffices to mention that, the march was divided into two blocks, one led by COSATU and one led by SAFTU. And this shows a distinct lack of unity between the country's top two, labor federations. So does that give you a sense that politicking was at play here, or there was a bona fide call for, a better life for all South Africans?
I think we have to recognize the two main issues that labor seems to be, striking for. First, it is this, a strike against the cost of living. We know transport costs have increased quite dramatically over the last year as oil price increased, the currency weakened, food price inflation as well has been rising because of the war in Ukraine, drought conditions in the likes of Brazil that are major players in grain, but also energy prices that have been increasing because of tariffs that Eskom has been asking for to improve its financial operations. That's the one aspect, just the cost of living that has been going up. The other aspect is, a strike against what seems to be a low investment by the private sector or lack of investment by the private sector, which ultimately result in low job creation and high unemployment rates that we have. Now, the second one of low jobs, low growth because of lack of investment is much more structural. It's not something that is, a one-year issue that we've had. We've had this for the last, decade or even more. So that requires structural reforms. What could be done on the first one? Essentially the increase in cost of living. That's where we need more targeted, approaches. For instance, I will just demonstrate one where government would have been smarter in its approach to simplify or to lessen the cost on citizens. When it reduced the fuel levy, it gave me and you that benefit. And clearly me and you, we don't need it. There are a lot more people that need this fuel levy benefit that use public transport system. Government could have opted to say, we will use the benefit of the reduction in fuel levy to subsidize public transport so that the cost for ordinary South Africans that cannot afford is at least kept constant throughout the whole year. So that's just evidence to show that it was poorly targeted, given to a lot of people that don't need it, and hence a misallocation of resources. But beyond that, a lot of the issues on energy and transport really requires a structural reforms. And by structural reform, it's not anything that is complex. There has always been, a recognition that people stay too far from places of work, and they spend way too much money on transport. Why then aren't we making the public sector transport system to be much more convenient and cheaper by investing in a proper, efficient public infrastructure network? They still continue to languish in a public transport network that is not well geared to reduce the cost of transportation. And when it comes to energy, we have known the energy deficiency since 1998, but we did not invest fast enough in much more reliable electricity. Hence today we are reliant on an Eskom that is unable to meet the demand of the economy. Those need structural reforms which are currently underway, and we need to see labor supporting these reforms so that the issues that society is complaining about can be solved.
Mr. Mhlanga, we can almost preempt what government's response to these demands would be. I mean, chief of which the country is still reeling from the adverse effects of the Ukrainian war and, the adverse effects, of course, of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's a whole host of other, excuses that the government can actually give. So do you get a sense then that the unions are prepared to negotiate with the government in terms of tabling some of these excuses?
Look, I would not be able to give you a straight answer on whether the unions will continue to negotiate with government or they will take to the streets. Suffice to say that this is not a South Africa specific issue. We have seen it in Sri Lanka. The president actually ran away and ultimately the government changed. We have also seen it in Italy. Mario Draghi, the prime minister, resigned because of the mismanagement of the economy. We have also seen it in the UK, where Boris Johnson ultimately resigned, yes, for his other personal lifestyle choices, but also the economy has been mismanaged. And a decade earlier, we've seen this in Tunisia, we've seen this in Egypt, where ultimately citizens take to the streets because the economy has been mismanaged, unemployment rates continue to rise. And in those two countries I mentioned last, they experienced these things with unemployment rate of between 10 and 15%. We have more than double that, which means it's actually a miracle. We haven't seen these sort of protests, wide enough, which means society has been too patient with government that has not been managing the economy appropriately. But we do have a reform process that is taking place now, which is where we need to rally all social partners to support those reforms, because the intended outcome should improve the performance of the economy going forward.